Okay, good evening, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Happy Hour brought to you by NAAP. We are the National Association of Adoptees and Parents, where it is our mission to unify the adoption community and elevate our diverse voices by promoting dialogue, understanding, and healing through education, awareness, and connections. I'm Marcie Keithley, Board President, and your host for the evening, along with Beth Story in the Zoom room helping out. Jennifer had a little emergency and had to drive to Illinois this evening, so she won't be joining us, but she's okay, and her family's okay, but she won't be joining us tonight. We're honored that so many of you chose your Friday night to come out and spend it with us. It's always exciting to see this kind of an attendance on a beautiful Friday evening, so thank you so much for joining us. If you're here for the very first time, please feel free to use the chat room and let us know a little who you are, how you identify, if in what city, state, or country you're here from. And before we begin, we just have a little disclosure we'd like to share with you. We do want to remind everyone that this is a public meeting with no guarantee that information or identity is confidential. Portions of this event are recorded and may be shared in our private happy hour group on Facebook. Please remain on mute, raise your hand, or use your virtual hand to be recognized. You may post your comments or questions in the chat room. If you're experiencing a serious mental health event or suicidal thought, please contact a licensed professional or call the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline. Excuse me. Okay, all right, well, let's learn a little bit about Lynn. I have a new puppy and this is so embarrassing. I'm sorry. Give me just 1 second here.
Is that dog going to be with us? Because it's messing up my hearing aid really badly.
Okay, sorry about that. So let's learn just a little bit about Lynn. For those of you that don't know Lynn, she's been actively involved in the adoption community for over a decade. Her writing journey began a few years after her birth mother told her she was conceived during a date rape. She wrote about the revelation under a pseudonym at Lost Daughters. Once she got a taste of the writing bug, she went on to publish more essays at Lost Daughters in adoption anthologies and at her blog, No Apologies for Being Me. In 2020, after many agonizing years, waiting for a close DNA match, Lynn was able to determine who her biological father was and spent the next 2 years writing a memoir about the journey to unravel her hidden identity. So we're going to learn all about Lynn and her journey to her memoir this evening. Welcome, Lynn.
Thank you, Marcie. I'm so grateful that you invited me to speak this evening. Although this isn't my first time, this is the first time I've spoken alone. I always have somebody with me to take the pressure off. So it's all me tonight, and I hope you guys don't fall asleep. But I prepared.
Look at all these people that you have to support you. Look at it that way.
Thank you. I'm so grateful that you guys came. Thank you.
Yeah.
So anyway, the reason Marcie invited me is because she got wind that I published an Audible memoir as a podcast. So I hope at some point you will go listen to it. I'll share all those details at the end. Feel free to rate it, comment, and I love to hear personal messages from anyone that it resonated with. Just a little bit about me. I am a baby scoop era adoptee, born and adopted in the Chicago, Illinois area, but I grew up in Dayton, Ohio. I have no memory of being told I was adopted, but I feel like I just always knew. I was quite a blabbermouth growing up and told everyone I was adopted. My mom described me as the kid who never knew a stranger and would say pretty much anything in public with no filter. I have one brother, also adopted, who is 3 years younger than me. We grew up as typical suburban kids, spending most of our time playing outdoors, climbing trees, and for me, listening to my favorite records. My family listened to what I call elevator music, which I hated. I played in the kitchen, in the car, and so most of the time in the basement, I listened to the radio, recording songs on my tape player, playing them back, and writing lyrics down. I discovered country music by accident when I heard some crossover hits by Glenn Campbell and Dolly Parton. And I'm still a big country music fan to this to this day. Throughout my memoir, I make references to different songs because music is just part of who I am, and everything that happens in life either can be or already is a song. I consider myself a musician, but a non-performing one. So as not to ruin the actual memoir for you, I'm going to give you my elevator version. Girl grows up wondering where she came from, meets boy, gets married, becomes instant mom, has a baby, adopts a baby, begins searching, hires adoption agency to find birth mom. I reunite with my birth mom, who states she has no idea who my birth father is because I was conceived during a date rape. Over the next 15 years, I try to find a way to learn who my birth father is. Enter genetic genealogy. I enter my DNA into every DNA database available, but I only have distant matches. I become impatient. I create a search team. I log into my DNA accounts every day for years. I write down my search journey at my blog, and lo and behold, in March of 2020, I finally get a close match, which solves the mystery of my birth father. So that's just the short version of my memoir, and I'm going to share here a PowerPoint with you and talk to you a little bit about some of the details and the journey of writing this memoir. Give me just a second here to share the screen. Get a little bigger for you. Oops. All right, that's probably too big. How's that, Beth? Looking good? You guys see it? Okay. All right. So the title of my talk tonight, The Story Behind the Story. So I didn't want to ruin like all the juicy parts for you in the podcast. So I just kind of am talking around the story and kind of giving you a little bit of background about the Cradle, about just my process through memoir and how I ended up writing a memoir, because it was not something that I actually intended to do most of my life. I didn't see myself as a writer. So let's start at the beginning. I already gave you my elevator version, so we'll move along. But this is a picture of my mom and dad and me at my baptism on the left, and then me and my favorite bouncy chair on the right. But this picture of me on the right kind of it just kind of explains my personality. Like I'm always talking about, I don't know a stranger and I just blab. So I think I came into the world that way. I really like this quote. Has anybody here seen the movie Matilda? It was my kid's favorite movie. So I have 3 kids, a stepdaughter, a son, and a adopted daughter, and all of my kids are from different generations, but they all loved this movie. Danny DeVito, he narrates it and he plays the father. And this girl, Matilda, she's from an abusive family and she's different than everybody. And she just isn't understood by her family at all. So I think anyone adopted or in foster care could resonate with the movie. But anyway, this quote really stood out for me in the movie. And I always get tears in my eyes when I hear Danny DeVito read it. So Matilda's strong young mind continued to grow, nurtured by the voices of all those authors who had sent their books out into the world like ships on the sea. These books gave Matilda a hopeful and comforting message. You are not alone. So I think that's one of the reasons I started blogging, is that I felt alone. And I wanted to see if there were other people out there in the internet world who also felt that way. So I think that's kind of what started my writing journey. I was never really somebody who wanted to be, quote, a writer growing up, but I felt alone in my journey, and I felt like there had to be somebody else out there that felt that way too. So what inspired me to document my story? As a kid, I was a 70s kid. I love Nancy Drew mysteries, written by Carolyn Keene. Some of you here probably can remember those. They were really, I just felt like I could really identify, and it didn't occur to me at the time that my life was also a mystery. Like I didn't put that together until later, but Really loved those books. Also loved the series Unsolved Mysteries in the 1980s. Anybody else? They searched for lost people in that show. So I think deep down, even though I didn't admit it to myself, I thought maybe someday I could find those missing people in my own life, my birth parents. And then another documentary series I loved was Behind the Music, because I'm a huge music buff. I go to lots of concerts, and I love to hear the early lives of musicians and bands and understand their road to success and their hardships. So those are some early inspirations of what I think propelled me eventually to document my own journey. And so I was researching some of the old Nancy Drew titles, and I came across this list, and it made me laugh because I thought, oh yeah, any adoptee in the room could have written a memoir with these titles. The Clue in the Diary, Nancy's Mysterious Letter, The Secret in the Old Attic, The Clue in the Old Album, Buried Secrets, Vanishing Act, Trail of Lies, The Hidden Inheritance, and Secret Identity. So it didn't occur to me until I looked at that list, and then this is what I ended up calling my own memoir, Hidden Identity. I don't think that's any accident, but I didn't put those two things together until I started preparing for this presentation. So these are some of the titles that I was very attached to at one time, and I'm sure anyone here in the room, Marcie probably could say that when you're writing a memoir, your title can change over time. And so I really liked all of these at one time. Searching for Julio was the name of my search team in the private room where everybody who was helping me search would put, information, trees, documents, photos, newspaper articles. And so for a really long time, that was my working title. Then later it shifted to The Other Side of the Glass. My birth mom told me that she never held me, but she looked at me through the glass. So I thought, what happened on the other side of the glass? That's my life. So I really liked that title for a while. And then later I switched it up to Daughter of Water and Fire, which I explain in my memoir what all that means. And then finally I was like, okay, this is really a book about genealogy and how it's really a documentation of how I found my ancestors. And I want this to be passed on to my descendants. So Hidden Identity really just kind of hit the sweet spot for me, because that's what it was for me. I felt like my identity was hidden, and I had to do all these things to get to the other side and figure out what it was. So that's kind of a little background on that. Oh, and my daughter created this cover for me. So I thought it was really cool. It means a lot to me. The brick, I don't know if you put with the brick, but it's a brick wall. In genealogy, they use the term brick wall when you can't find somebody. So that's why the brick is in the back. So you're probably wondering, why a podcast? Instead of publishing traditionally as a book, I went ahead and did a podcast. Some of it was laziness, I'll admit. I didn't want to go through the formatting, editing, and a lot of the process that I had to go through when I published the Adoptee Survival Guide. It just took such a long time. And I was like, I don't really want to do that work. So that was part of the consideration. But then there was also these considerations. I left office life in 2019. And so now for my current job, I spend a lot of time in my car. And I just fell in love with podcasts. I absolutely love podcasts. There's two major podcasters here in the room. Jennifer Ghostin and Andi of the Adoption Files is here with us tonight. I really love this form of media, and Jennifer has an audio drama at her podcast. She can tell you more about it, but it really inspired me. She interviewed me for her podcast, and she did it way better than I did mine. I'll just say that, because she has voices and music, and like I'm driving down the road listening to the story, and I'm like bawling, and I'm like, oh my God, this is just so powerful. So that inspired me. And a lot of the other podcasters, like Adoptees On, some of the others, I don't always listen to just adoption podcasts. I have a lot of others I like. I listen to don't laugh, Joe Rogan, because my son is a millennial and he sends me different Joe Rogan podcasts. And the one that really did it for me was Jewel. She did a 3-hour interview, and I got her audiobook, and it just really inspired me. And I feel like when you can hear the person's voice tell their own story, there's something very powerful about that. You just feel like you understand that person in a way that you just can't when you're reading the physical book. So besides all those reasons, here's a few others. It's a newer form of media. It's becoming popular. It has a greater accessibility, and it's free. My son really encouraged me a lot to start a podcast. He kept bugging me for a couple of years before I finally did it. And like I said, I love Audible memoirs. Most of the books I read now are through Audible. So those are some of the reasons. Okay, so I wanted to share a little bit about the Cradle Adoption Agency because the Cradle is such a big part of my story. It shows up in many of the chapters in my book. I did a chapter, it's an imaginary conversation that my birth mom has with her mom on her way to the Cradle to be dropped off for the final time before she lives in the maternity home. And that was some creative nonfiction that I came up with because obviously I wasn't there. I mean, I was there, but I was in utero. I don't know the actual conversation. So I used that. Also, Michael, I don't think he's here with us tonight, but he's a Cradle adoptee as well. And we were all referred to as Cradle babies. And he made me aware last year that there was a back door just for birth moms. He went on a tour there and saw the back door where all the birth moms entered. The adoptive parents came through the front door and the birth moms came through the back door. And so I had these visuals, and I was trying to create this scenario of what it was like for her. I also wanted to document what it was like during the baby scoop era. So I did a lot of research in newspapers.com. I took a lot of what my birth mom and I had discussed and kind of weaved it into a story. So anyway, what you're looking at right here is these are all the student nurses that took care of the babies, including me. I lived there for 2.5 months. And behind the student nurses is the Wall of Fame. There was a lot of famous people who adopted from the Cradle. And so they hung pictures of them and some of the babies on the wall. The building you can see is a big stone building. And they have been in business for 99 years. I don't know if anyone in the room was at the Red Couch rebuttal, but we shared some things about the Cradle during that happy hour. They also boast the only on-site nursery in the country. And some of the famous people you might know are George Burns, Bob Hope, Donna Reed, Pearl Buck, and Gail Sayers. I was gifted a really wonderful surprise last year when, let's see, I don't know if Lorraine's here with us tonight, but Lorraine Wheeler, she is an adoptee who set up an interview with a nurse from the Cradle for me. And I was able to interview her, which then prompted me to write, I felt inspired to write a poem called Cradle Baby, which is in the introduction of my memoir. And it was the first time that I was able to understand like what my experience could have been there because, you know, obviously I don't remember it. I was too young. So it was really powerful. And I was really thankful to Lorraine for arranging that for me. It gave me kind of a different view that I didn't have before I was able to interview her. So here's some more photos from the Cradle. This is the red couch that was discussed in the red couch rebuttal. Adoptive parents sit on this couch with their children and get photos after they're adopted. And then these are the cubicles, the black and white cubicles that there's glass between you and each baby had their own cubicle from what I understood. And they were very germ conscious. They were written up in the newspapers as like state of the art. Less babies died in their care because of the way they handled sanitation, and they were looked to as experts in that regard at one time. This To the left is the room where all the parents met their babies for the first time. That is the actual room. And then to the right is the actual photo of my father meeting me for the first time in 1966. Okay, I want to shift to talking about what memoir is. And I want to encourage everybody to share their story in whatever format they feel comfortable. It's not always memoir, but I wanted to share a little bit about my process and encourage you to take some baby steps toward that if it's something that you desire. So what is memoir? I like to think of it as a journey to the past. I've been listening to this song from the movie Anastasia called Journey to the Past. It's about an orphan and she's looking for her family. And I really feel like that's what it is. It's a journey, and it's not the journey that you think you're taking. Right, Marcie? So these are some of the themes in adoption memoirs that I pulled out, and all of these are part of my own memoir. Identity as a human right, overcoming barriers, reaching out for help, don't give up, you are not alone. So when you're writing a memoir, you might feel or experience some of these things. You definitely are going to discover new things about yourself that you didn't know before. And I think that's surprising to some people. And Marcie and I discussed this when we were planning for this talk. And I asked her if I could share a quote that she sent me, this is what she wrote. There are so many undiscovered pieces of us that we find as we write. That really surprised me. I really thought I had it all thought out, but the story pulled me in different directions and made me revisit some painful pieces of me. I still am finding more pieces of me that need nurturing. I thought that was really profound. And as a friend of mine in this room, I won't call her out, but we had discussed recently about how you relive trauma when you write memoir, and that you can have different effects from that because you are, and as you write, at least for me, I experienced the grieving process, but also you're processing different things that have happened to you. And then you're also reevaluating your journey through a different lens. So I say toward the end of my memoir that I see my family in a different way now that I'm at the end of this hero's journey. I see everybody differently, including myself. And I wanted to recommend the documentary Unintended Memoir. I just noticed this week it's on Netflix. It's about Amy Tan and her process of writing a memoir. She had a lot of trauma growing up, and I thought it was a really powerful documentary. When you're writing memoir, you can experience acceptance and healing of events that were previously triggering to you. This is something that I've experienced, and surprisingly, I didn't expect this, but when I was reading my own memoir out loud to be recorded, and then later as I was walking, exercising, I was listening to my own memoir, it was like I got outside of myself and I could see it from another viewpoint. And I felt that that was really healing to me. Owning our stories, Brene Brown says that we, when we own our stories, it makes us more powerful. We feel less like something was done to us and more like I'm the driver in this journey. So to me, those are some of the things that you experience when you're writing memoir. I already shared that with you guys. And then I also wanted to share some of the roadblocks because these were really hard for me, and some of these, and Marcie and I actually talked about this right before we recorded, the inner critic especially. But these are some roadblocks that can keep you wound up for a long time. It might cause you to put your book in a drawer for a year or more or forever. And so just be aware that perfectionism sneaks in for all of us. I saw a quote online, done is better than good, and done definitely trumps perfect. So I thought that was kind of a good thing to think about. It's never going to be perfect, but when it's done, you have something to be proud of. Inner critic, this was a big one for me. These are some of the things my inner critic would say to me. The story is so boring, it will put people to sleep. Nobody cares about this story. I honestly felt that way for the longest time. Procrastination, because I didn't know who my birth father was, I kept saying, I can't publish this book. I don't have an ending. And that's exactly how I felt about it. Like, I don't have an ending. So then after I found him, I still wasn't ready to publish the book because all the events after you find your birth parent hadn't yet unfolded. So that was one of my issues with publishing. And my lovely writing group, Becky, was part of my writing group. She's here in the room tonight. She got to hear all of this before by lamenting about it. A few more roadblocks are fear, false evidence appearing real. So yeah, we can get ourselves worked up into a real tizzy about every little fearful thing. A couple of the ones I was afraid of, and it still could happen. Getting sued is one of them. So we can talk more about that later, but yeah, I decided to use pseudonym, different names for people so I could protect their privacy. Shame is another one. And it's weird too, because I'm part of a female adoptee writers group, and someone posted this week, did you feel shame when you wrote your memoir? And the poster did not feel shame, and a lot of the commenters didn't either, but I really did, because I was really having a hard time with my conception circumstances and being able to share that in a way that wasn't offensive to people. And I thought Becky heard this too, and Lorraine Pittman and Lynn Miller, that's my writing group. They heard a lot of me like going over in circles and circles and circles about this. Should I make this public? Can I even talk about this? Am I a bad person if I'm looking for someone who's a possible rapist? All of those things circled in my head over and over and over until I could like process them and come to some kind of peace with it, which is eventually what happened. But for a long time, I felt that shame, and it stopped me from being able to really see my story in a way that I wanted to present it in the final podcast, if that makes sense. Being vulnerable with strangers. Yeah, they're going to judge me, and they're going to say mean things, and they're going to think I'm a bad person, and they're going to stop talking to me. Like all of those types of fears that when you're vulnerable and you share your weaknesses and your feelings, that, it is a risk, and it's possible that they will. So, but you have to kind of come to a peace about that as well. And I found this quote, it's really long, but I really liked it. I love Elizabeth Gilbert. And so she says, recognizing that people's reactions don't belong to you is the only sane way to create. If people enjoy what you've created, terrific. If people ignore what you've created, too bad. If people misunderstand what you've created, don't sweat it. And what if people absolutely hate what you've created? What if people attack you with savage vitriol and insult your intelligence and malign your motives and drag your good name through the mud? Just smile sweetly and suggest as politely as you possibly can that they go make their own effing art, then stubbornly continue making yours. I really liked that a lot. Here's another quote that Marcie sent me that I really loved about how memoir kind of just takes on a life of its own. It knows what it wants to be. Many times I felt that I was just a puppet and kept looking up, wondering who or what energy was guiding me. I questioned myself, saying things like, did I really just write that? Where the hell did that come from? I love that. It's kind of like when I read that, I thought of the Muse. They call it the Muse. Like the Muse really does take you on this journey, and it's not the journey that you think it's going to be. So I don't know if Regina's in the room. I can't see because of my PowerPoint, but anyway, her and Gay Tannenbaum, who I know is here, were my lead searchers. I heard a voice in the wilderness. They were my lead searchers on my search on the search. And so we were searching all the time. And this picture is at the NAAP conference 2019. We're sitting in our hotel room, and I logged into 23andMe, and I had my closest Peruvian match ever. And so Regina got there. This is her first time at a NAAP conference. She flew in from Rhode Island. And before we even unpacked our suitcases, we were building trees right there in the room. So, I mean, this is the kind of dedication that the people had that worked on my case. You can learn more about all the stuff that we did if you listen to my memoir, but this is just one of the many things. Gay worked tirelessly, even just to help me understand what the heck was happening in my DNA. You know, she's an expert, and she's CC Moore level, and she's talks over my head half the time, but I learned so much from her. So I just wanted to share this photo with you, and that it all happened at the NAAP conference. I thought that was pretty neat. And here's a couple photos of my birth father. The black and white one is from a yearbook photo, which is what I call the smoking gun in the book, where we finally realized, I think this is the guy. And then the other photo is his passport photo that I literally took from Facebook. Some of these photos are things that I would like to put in my memoir if I publish it someday, but you know, obviously we can't do that all the time. So, and this is an article that Regina found when we were researching this person, my father, Antonio. And I thought this was so ironic. He gave a talk called In Search of Identity, the Writers of Latin America. He was a Latin American expert. He was a professor in Canada. So that was his expertise. And I just thought, how crazy is that? You can't even make this stuff up, you know, like In Search of Identity. What are the chances? So then about a year after this, I was taking an internet genealogy course, and I started using some of the skills that I was learning in school. And I pulled up this actual talk. It was in an archive in a Canadian city library. And I got to listen to the talk In Search of Identity, the Writers of Latin America, for 30 minutes. I got to actually hear my father's voice, which is really amazing for me because I never got to meet him. So it was something I just wanted to share, a little tidbit. So I think this kind of sums up about telling your story. The central question upon which all creative living hinges: do you have the courage to bring forth the treasures that are hidden within you? Again, that's Elizabeth Gilbert. So I want to encourage you all to share your story, and there's so many ways that you can do that. These are just, I want to encourage you to take baby steps. If this is something that's in your heart to do, these are some examples of some of the things that you can do, and some of the people in this room are already doing them very, very well. You can be a guest on someone's podcast. You can be a guest at someone's blog. You can start your own blog. You can write essays. You can create anthologies. You can submit to other anthologies. You can write articles. You can tell your story in support groups. You can tell your story to your writing group. You can tell your story at conferences. All of these are ways that you can start to share and process what your journey has been with others, and it will help other people to feel less alone. This little thing down at the bottom, Love What Matters, the editor of Love What Matters reached out to me a year ago and asked me to share my story. She actually saw my poem called Cradle Baby that I had published, and I was a little nervous about it because there's like 1 million followers at Love What Matters, but I was like, okay, this is the first time I'm going to share outside of the adoption community. This is a big opportunity that I want to take because it could help somebody out there that isn't in our community. So I went ahead and did it. And that was the headline they used down at the bottom there. So that was a proud moment when I saw that get published. There was a lot of people who read that article. And then all these books that you see are different anthologies that I've contributed to over the years. And, you know, with the goal of educating about the adoptee experience inside and outside of our community, because I think that's so important. When we share our stories, we are educating, we are helping other people feel less alone. And we're healing ourselves and we're helping other people at the same time. So I encourage you to do that. Like I said, if it's something that you feel is on your heart. It's not for everyone. public writing isn't for everyone. Public speaking isn't for everyone, because the downside of it is you do get people who will come to your blog and leave you a nasty message. And I think you have to have a certain level of thick skin in order to be able to tolerate that. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. When I first started blogging, I got a lot of hateful messages that really hurt my feelings. And I spent a lot of time trying to process all of that too. But I really think the good outweighs the negative when it comes to sharing your story publicly. So if you want to listen to my memoir, you can go to the Adoption Experience podcast. It's on Spotify, Apple, and Podbean. And if you want to reach out to me, you can contact me through the Adopted Genealogist on Instagram, Facebook, or TikTok. That's it for me.
Well, thank you, Lynn. That was
Great, Lynn. Yes.
presentation. Excellent presentation. Yeah, what we're going to do now, we are going to stop the recording and open this up for a Q&A. So I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording right now.